This is World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with your host, Carl Gruber. World Awakenings is a podcast dedicated to opening your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how they play an all-important role in our daily life. So join Carl on this enlightening experience as he interviews metaphysical and spiritual experts to discuss, debate, and delve deeply into the hows and whys of this worldwide awakening.
You've seen and read my 3 Pillars ebook, and now I'm proud to announce my new book, True Spirituality and the Law of Attraction, a beautiful symbiotic relationship, and it's now out and ready for reading. This new book of mine is a full-length version of the teachings of the 3 Pillars, and in it I show you how to walk in the integrity of eternal and universal laws, in step with the law of attraction to consistently create the life you desire. Now, if you've ever wondered just why you can't consistently manifest all the good, loving, abundant, healthy, and happy things you desire, my new book, True Spirituality and the Law of Attraction, will reveal the key in how to do just that. Plus, help you build a rock-solid personal foundation that will stand strong for the ages. Get your copy today. My new book, True Spirituality and the Law of Attraction, a beautiful symbiotic relationship by Carl Gruber. Available now in ebook and paperback on Amazon.com. Hey, if you're looking for all things metaphysical, spiritual, and enlightening, you've found it. This is the podcast World Awakenings, a fast track to enlightenment. The show that asks why now, more than ever, are people of the world awakening to all things metaphysical, spiritual, and enlightening. And with today's show, I do believe we will delve into an aspect of these topics like never before. Now, before we check in with today's guests, please take a moment to check out my brand new book, True Spirituality and the Law of Attraction, a beautiful symbiotic relationship, a book that will show you how to create a rock-solid personal foundation so that you can become a consistent co-creator with the universe in creating the life you love to live and live to love. And also make sure to click that subscribe button below so that you never miss a single episode of this awesome podcast. Well, our guest today is Deborah Eden Tull, and she is the founder of Mindful Living Revolution. She is a Zen meditation instructor, dharma teacher, spiritual activist, author, and sustainability educator. She trained for 7.5 years as a Buddhist monk at a silent Zen monastery and has taught Engaged Dharma for over 20 years. That sounds amazing. Eden has lived in sustainable communities and as an organic gardener and farmer for decades and celebrates the essential wisdom of nature. She currently resides in the mountains of western North Carolina, originally Cherokee land, with her husband. She offers retreats, workshops, classes, and consultations nationally and internationally, integrating presence and partnership with nature. Her work has been featured in the LA Times, Tricycle, Yogi Times, Shambhala Times, the Shift Network, Best Self, and the Ecologist. She's also been teaching for UCLA's Mindful Awareness Research Center since 2012. And on top of that, she has written 3 books. The first one, The Natural Kitchen, Your Guide for the Sustainable Food Revolution. Then Relational Mindfulness, a handbook for deepening our connection with ourselves, each other, and the planet. And her newest book, Luminous Darkness, an Engaged Buddhist Approach to Embracing the Unknown, much of which we will be discussing here today. So welcome, Eden. Welcome to World Awakenings.
Grateful to be here with you and your listeners, and I'm curious to see where our conversation goes.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just going to be something else. So, first of all, before we dive into everything, I'm going to have lots of questions for you. Let's start at the beginning of your path as a youngster to where you are now. I understand that you grew up in an activist family as a youngster and started meditating very early.
I did, yeah. Well, I was first taught to meditate by my grandmother on a camping trip by a creek, a memory I will always have etched within me. But I didn't take it on as a daily committed practice until after high school, the start of college. And I had a very unique set of parents. My parents were activists and artists. And when I was 6 years old, my mom set aside her work as an artist to respond to an article in the LA Times about the grave situation of children in LA's Skid Row. And she had never engaged in any of that kind of work before, but she is a real force of nature. And she began the first of four nonprofits and a really incredible, moving, and powerful career as a social justice activist. So that and my family's involvement in service and communities geared towards service really informed a lot of my path. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. In growing up in an environment, they say we choose our parents before we're born. Boy, you chose a great pair of parents. And your dad was similar like that too?
Well, my parents were a beautiful dyad in that they were very much opposites in terms of the balance of yin and yang. And actually, I explore this balance in our book. Energetically and personality-wise, my mom was the side that was more about yang and a real force of nature, as I described. And my dad was the parent who really tended the relational field and who made our lunches when we went to school and who coached our soccer teams growing up. And I talk about him in my book as my first spiritual teacher. And what I mean by that is he was a contemplative Christian and he really held a role in our community of being a mentor and teacher to many, just because it was part of his presence. And he introduced me at a young age to a lot of different teachings, ranging from Taoism and Krishnamurti to Buddhism to Christianity, which was his path. My mom was Jewish. And they basically gave us the message that, you can choose your own path. Every human has to. It has to come from within you, and we'll give you the nudge that, in our experience, your spiritual path is going to be the most important thing. So that really deeply formed me. And when I was 11 years old, we found out one day that my dad, out of the blue, had a month left to live. So experiencing that kind of unexpected loss and having our family unit shaken up, and then also getting to watch my dad and his practice move through the dying process and model it with such grace and gratitude, that definitely, there was no turning back after that about my intention and longing here to live spiritual practice and to embody and model some of what my dad showed me. You with me?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I really love that you use that word dyad, that your parents were a beautiful dyad. I haven't heard that word in a long time. That's a really good description. I really love that. So, the other thing that I'm just absolutely fascinated by is that you, I believe it was at the age of 26, actually committed yourself to become a Zen Buddhist monk. You went 7.5 years without speaking. What was that like?
Sure. Well, I had been meditating for quite some time then and just knew that it was calling me deeper, and knew that the connections I was making through my practice and the experience of my own healing, and at the same time, my desire to be of service in our world. I'll just pause and say, I became an activist at a young age as well, modeled by my parents. And in the work I was involved in, again, environmental and social justice work, it was so clear to me that the human ego so often gets involved. And in the way of our intentions to be of service, our intentions to collaborate as teams, our intentions to make positive change in the world. So I was like, I need to spend some time just focusing on dissolving the human ego and learning more about how I can help people with this piece. Because as far as I could tell, nature modeled so many of the solutions we need, and yet the human ego, the human, as we talk about it in Buddhism, tendency of the ego towards greed, hate, and delusion tends to confuse us along the way. So at 26, I shaved my head and gave away my belongings and moved to the monastery where I trained for many years. And just to clarify, it was a silent environment. Also, we ran a retreat center there where people could come on silent retreat. But we also paused 3 times during the week to circle together and to share, to come together for dharma teachings and inquiry, and to talk about how we were growing or what we were struggling with as we grew. Because it's so important to have that kind of inner support while you're doing your own practice in silence. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You actually did speak during those times. It was just the rest of it was silence. Yeah.
You've got it. Yeah, yeah. And I'll just share that when I moved back out into the world, and interestingly enough, I moved to the city of Los Angeles somewhat unexpectedly, which is a wild contrast to a silent wilderness monastery. It's in that time that I was inspired to write my second book, which is Relational Mindfulness, because I saw both within me and in everyone I was guiding and teaching such a need for a clearer bridge between meditation and how we engage in the relational field, all of our relationships, conversations, the field of socializing, working together, dating, whatever it is. So that's where that book came from. And it was a perfect way for me to integrate the depth of monastic practice with now living in a world filled with people, where I had to very intentionally carve out time for silence and solitude. Yeah.
Well, and in the relationships with whether it's your partner or other people in your life, that's usually where most of the trauma and stress are associated, because so many wild and crazy emotions and energies get involved.
And it's great because when people understand that that is where awakening can happen, that we wake up together when we're willing to be fully present in the relational field, in those moments of trigger, in those moments of fear of deeper connection, in those moments of awkward silence, all of it, that's where our healing happens. So that's very much what that second book is about. Yeah.
And your fact that you're a Zen Buddhist monk, I've only peripherally touched on it. I've attended a few local Zen Buddhist meditation, weekends, and actually just for Saturday morning, and it was cool. I never experienced it. And I stayed once in Northern California at Tassajara, a Zen Buddhist monastery, just for a weekend, and that was a long time ago. It was awesome. So I'd love to go back. But, I actually, I really am anxious to talk about your new book, Luminous Darkness. But I do want to ask you about this. What is this mindful living revolution that you found? I'd really like to find out about that.
Sure. So this is the nonprofit that I run, and I lead retreats and trainings and workshops for people all over the world. We have a beautiful community and a sangha that meets each week. And I founded this nonprofit when I moved back out into the world and wanted an organization and community that was really deeply anchored in practice and the bridge between personal and collective awakening. So it's not just about our spiritual practice, but how we let that inform and transform the way we show up in the world and the ways we're of service to the world, so that we're engaged in the inner and outer work, we might say, at the same time. And it's really, really fun to dissolve that separation. And it's really fun to continually see what emerges in the work and the communities of people I guide, and how they integrate their own practice into showing up more courageously and more compassionately to the needs of this world. Yeah.
Is that something that people can join with you? Do you have a program?
Yes. Yeah, people can visit my website, which is deborahEdenTull.com. And one simple way to join is that we have a community called the Fierce Compassion Sangha. And so we meet once a week for meditation every Tuesday. And it's different themes that we explore every month, different ways people connect with one another through that community. It's really beautiful, and it's engaging and healing. So there's plenty of ways to get involved on my website. Yeah.
It's so obvious that you definitely live the walk you talk. It is amazing. I love it. So let's go ahead and dive headfirst into your brand new book, Luminous Darkness. I'll be right up front about this. I unashamedly call myself a light worker. So, but I am open to learning and hearing about this. Why this topic? What is luminous darkness?
Sure. And first, I'll just say that no shame at all in being a light worker. So many people listening, and myself included, can resonate with the desire to let our lights shine more fully in the world. And one of the points that I'm making in the book is that there's a long-held bias in human consciousness that I think has got to go now, that I don't think has been serving us for a long time, that's both pointing to the divide between light and dark, which are actually a sacred interplay, like the sacred interplay of yin and yang, and which holds light as superior to dark. And so there's a way in which, if we're not careful, we can use the label of dark to judge and try to push away everything that we find uncomfortable, unworthy, unwanted. And this affirms an unnecessary duality between good and bad, higher, lower, superior, inferior. It impacts both how people perceive themselves, because if I'm perceiving that all of my light is good, but my dark is bad, or my light is to be celebrated, but my dark to be pushed away and rejected, and I'm so ashamed I have it, and I'm projecting that same thing onto others, I'm not going to be tapping into my deepest power. Our shared power is our wholeness. It welcomes everything. It dissolves the duality between light and dark, but it also celebrates the energies of both poles, light and dark. And so, for instance, early on in my practice, I came to recognize that there was so much energy and mental effort and kind of a striving going to trying to attain enlightenment. Let's get to the light. Let's transcend this difficult stuff. I'm finally going to be done with it. And I found a very different and counterintuitive path through Zen that brought me so much relief, that it's not about pushing away or really about excluding anything, but remembering the all-inclusive, welcoming, unconditionally loving presence that doesn't have to exclude. Yeah. And I could continue to say that in my view, there's many other ways this fixation with light impacts us. So sometimes light in human consciousness has been used as a metaphor of the lamp of knowledge, kind of really emphasizing rational mind as better than intuition, other forms of knowing, dreams, and even historically in the burning times and in the Cartesian era, there was a whole lot of shunning and pushing away of wisdom traditions that were counter to rational mind as God. You with me so far? And so sometimes even in the modern meditation and mindfulness movement, people without knowing it sometimes are carrying this unconscious bias and thinking, if I just can transcend the difficult stuff instead of be fully with it in an embrace, if I just can philosophize or understand my way, what are the 3 steps I need to take rather than being with the mystery itself in a harmonious way. Yeah, my book speaks to a lot of this in depth and asks people to look just personally at some of the ways they see the impact of this hierarchical perception that I'm suggesting is not our true nature, that's focused on positive versus negative. I'll also just want to add that, this pushing away of dark, it happens in many more ways, many more nuanced ways, from, of course, xenophobia and pushing away whole peoples or othering people that we label dark in any way. It points to a disconnect from the natural world, because if we look to nature as teacher, we see that dark is equally valuable to light. The restorative nature of a shady tree, or of the dark soil protected that a seed is germinating. And I could go on and on, but I think I'm giving you a sense. I really point to in this book the personal, transpersonal, mystical, ecological, societal implications around this duality.
So my guess is that humankind has been entrained for all of history to fear the light. I mean, to fear the darkness. It's something that has been instilled in us. It's not natural for us to be afraid or shy away from the dark.
So I suggest that it's not natural perception, that true nature perceives beyond hierarchy, beyond duality, what we point to in Zen as original consciousness, just seeing life as it is. But pointing to history for a moment, in my research, it's not resonant that this fear and pushing of the dark was always so. I point to Zoroaster as the founder of the first religion that divided into two and that created this right versus wrong. And that formed the shape of almost every religion after that, right versus wrong, good versus bad. And throughout history, there have been so many wisdom traditions, and still are today, and peoples who respect and revere the dark. Remember that until recently, we spent a lot of time in physical darkness. Electricity is pretty new. The overlighting of our planet Earth is within the past 50 years, and now it's dangerously overlit. And there are wisdom traditions which have valued darkness as an instigator of spiritual growth, so have intentionally gone to spend time in the pure dark, time in the dark of a cave, time on darkness retreat. There are traditions I talk about in Africa, the Dagara tribe, where it's considered the wrong thing to do to bring a light into the dark of night other than campfire, because darkness is respected as the domain of the ancestors, the domain of the spirits. Why would we disrupt that field? So I think it's interesting to just consider that in today's world, we're so certain that the preference is to be in a very brightly lit space, just physically. And if we look at darkness, not just physically, but metaphorically and symbolically, we're very certain that, for instance, the rational mind is God, as opposed to more relational forms of knowing. So there's a lot I could say around this, but does that stir the pot a little bit?
I would say, I will have to say that what you are speaking to here is definitely an aspect that I don't think that very many people have considered. Now, what you mentioned duality, and of course, light and dark represent duality here in our egoic 3D world. But if you look at people who are seeking enlightenment and ascension, the goal is to get back to beyond duality, to non-duality, where in all of the traditions, especially what I focus on is A Course in Miracles, and I know there's beautiful other teachings, Buddhism to name one, is to return to the light. I mean, teachings say that when you return to source, there's nothing but brilliant light. There is no darkness, but then you've left behind duality. It is only non-duality.
So there's a great quote from the Kashmir Shaivist tradition. There is no darkness within, only light unseen. Within each of us is the great eastern sun that never sets. So there's that to consider. And there's a great quote, I hope I'm getting the person right, Barbara Taylor Brown. And it's that darkness is not dark to God. The night is as bright as the day. So when our perception lens is clear, when we're what I call seeing with the heart, we are seeing all of life. We might say with love. We're seeing all of life as having its place. We're recognizing that the slowness and darkness of the winter season is not in any way inferior to the productivity and flowering and brightness of the summer. We're seeing and recognizing that the slow, invisible processes we go through on the spiritual path, the times that we're invited to let our heart break open and feel our grief as part of our love for the world, is not something to avoid. Quite the opposite. It's in spending time communing with our inner darkness, and I would suggest now our collective darkness, in that we're facing so much global uncertainty and collective unknown, that allows us to get in touch with that steadfast, sturdy, ever-present compassion. Does that make sense?
Well, I agree with you that, and most of the again, the term for lack of a better word, light workers say that this current time of global chaos is actually good, and it is leading people to finally say, wait, there's got to be something better than this, awakening to something beyond the chaos, and realize that really, I guess, what you're saying, darkness can lead to light. So is that wrong in saying that, like, even your book is called Luminous Darkness? If you learn from the darkness, is the goal to go to light?
Think about this for a moment. First, I would say, no, it's not. It's to rest in the embrace of the sacred interplay of light and dark that exists as the backbone of all of nature, and I'm going to suggest as the backbone of humans, who we are. And so just to consider, all light comes from darkness. All vision, all creativity, all possibility, all insight arises from what we speak of in Buddhism as emptiness, spaciousness. We call it fertile emptiness, though, because it's so easy to think of emptiness as the absence of something. All it's actually the absence of is a subject-object relationship to life. Likewise, darkness we typically think of as the absence of light. And this is kind of what I'm pointing to, even in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. That's the definition, the absence of light, because light is what we want to focus on. And this book is inviting people to consider what actually is darkness, if not the absence of light. What is darkness as a field of restoration, of medicine? What is darkness as the field of the yin aspect of nature, the slow, invisible, quiet, unseen, as opposed to light as the bright, speedy, active? And that's the confusion. That's what people are trying to get to. The difference symbolically and metaphorically between these two. Also remembering that darkness is representative. This is one of the most important points of the mystery, the unknown, the mystery from which we all came and to which we will all return. The mystery. So in Zen, there's a deep invitation to remember how to rest in not knowing. Remember how to be with the mystery of life, to be with what is, to be with, again, this fertile emptiness that we come into contact with through meditation. When we stop filling the space with our thoughts and the ways we try to control and our projections onto life, when we let some of that go, this fertile emptiness is akin to the darkness. And I want to emphasize again, as human beings, in my experience, we contain the full spectrum of light and dark. Every human life does. And when we open our eyes to embracing that full spectrum, as opposed to trying to push away some to ascend to the other, there's a greater wholeness. There's a greater wholeness. We don't have to effort to try to get to the light. The light's unflickering within, but it's our experiences in darkness and in stillness that help us to see that, to know that, to not have to question that. Does that resonate? Even though we speak different languages, which is what I love about this conversation. We come from different backgrounds. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I'm really I am open to, and I can see where you're coming from, that we need to learn from both dark and light, that they are duality. But in traditional spiritual teachings, and I may even have the wrong word on that, traditional, but is that the two can never exist in the same place. When there is darkness, there is no light. When there is light, cannot be darkness.
This isn't so. The Tao, the ancient Tao, and even the symbol of the yin and yang has a dot of the light in the middle of the black part of the shape, a dot of the black in the middle of the light, showing that they always exist together. That in the moment of deepest, there's so many examples I could give, and I talk about this in the book, but in the moment of deepest joy, there can also be a dot of dark, the recognition that it's my knowing of impermanence, that life is fleeting, that allows me to feel even deeper joy for this life. In the moment of emptying ourselves, which is a metaphor for the dark, emptying ourselves to that field of possibility is exactly when that seed of creation comes to life. So the Tao is part of what I'm writing about in this book, and the symbol of the Tao models that sacred interplay, that they always coexist. One of the experiences I write about in the book, I write often about how nature is our greatest teacher in my experience, rather than human concepts, human ideas, turning to nature as guide. And I've spent many, many years living close to the earth and living in context and situations where it wasn't so much in the modern world, but just living more as part of the seasons, and for a long time, and while I was a monk, living off the grid, so in solar community. And one of the things that you get to experience is the continual spectrum from dawn till the brightness of the day, till dusk, till the darkest night. That life is one spectrum. It's one continual fluid spectrum. The internal experience, exactly the same. If you sit in meditation, you experience this full, constantly moving, changing spectrum. The only thing that is unchanging is awareness itself. And if we fixate on this versus that, or I'm up for the brightness of day, but I'm really going to push away my experience or judge myself when it gets to the darkest night, we're going to suffer. And we're going to, in my experience, the way I would put it, we're going to not see clearly our innate wholeness as part of nature. Yeah.
I think what I do like about what you're talking about, I think, you're a beautiful example of this, is that you can go into the darkness and not be afraid and not fear. Because it's basically, like I said, I have a quote, a line from your book here. The Judeo-Christian implication that light represents good and dark represents evil is thoroughly and subtly infused in today's world. And so that's kind of what you're speaking to. I mean, me too, we've been trained since the inception of mankind to fear the dark. And really, I mean, even if I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning in my dark bedroom, I don't have to be afraid. The only reason I would be afraid is because of fears that I've been trained to be afraid of the dark,
Mm-hmm. And let's just go a step further in exploring that. When we are even just in physical dark, part of the fear is, okay, I can't see, I don't have my regular visible reference that makes me feel safe, and I'm facing the unknown, the unfamiliar. Human ego, the human conditioned mind, tries to deal with discomfort by creating some form of labeling, categorizing. If I can know it and understand it up here, then I'll feel safe. And that's another way of saying, if I can get to the light as the lamp of knowledge, the rational mind, then I can feel safe. But in spiritual practice, we are asked to, if we're going to go deep, let go of the familiar shore and not yet see the next shore where we will land. And in the world right now, with all that we're facing as a species, more so than any of our ancestors have faced, we're being asked to let go of a familiar shore, and we're being invited, if we will, to learn to meet the unknown, the dark, the unfamiliar, that which we can't understand, from a different center of intelligence within, not through trying to understand it, but a deeper center of intelligence. And so, as again, a symbol for this, even if we're to close our eyes and just pause from the visual field, we can notice that some of our other senses begin to open and become stronger. If we were walking through a dark forest, thicketed dark forest, and I use this metaphor in the book because I live surrounded by forest, without a brightly lit path and signs instructing us where to go, we would have the invitation to drop into a more body integrated, senses open, deep listening as a way of life. And that's what I teach, deep listening within and out as a way of life. It would put us back in touch with a relational intelligence, an inner compass. I talk about this sometimes as inner vision, that people in today's world, I will suggest, truly lose touch with when they're so focused on trying to get somewhere, when they're so focused on the visual field and the notion, even if it's unconscious, that what we see is what we get, I see is set in stone. And also just that people forget to drop into a deeper experience of sensing, perceiving, being with life beyond that habit of labeling. Does that make sense?
I'm processing everything.
Take your time. Take your time. You know, darkness is a teacher also in slowing down. And what I see in the dominant paradigm is a real fixation equally with speed and productivity. That's another way that we can focus on what makes us comfortable. Slowing down, and again, the yin, restorative aspect of nature, makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and yet there's a deep hunger and need for it. There's a lot of people who don't get enough rest.
I think for me, I think the biggest thing is because when I contemplate dark and light represents duality within the 3D plane of our human existence and experience. And it seems to me that the goal of anyone who wants to ascend and transcend and become enlightened and awaken is to go back to leave duality behind and end up in a non-dualistic situation where, and again, I mean, of course, it's my training and everything. To me, it's all represented by being at source where there is light. Is it possible that could happen to an enlightened? You go there and God's sitting in the dark? I'm open to anything.
You know, I'm going to just suggest, and this is an experience people might want to have, you know, the book uses the phrase luminous darkness. Sometimes other wisdom traditions point to it as divine darkness. Again, it's when we don't think of dark as the absence of light and we allow ourselves to, this is an invitation, to meditate in darkened stillness, to really sense into this light that we're going for, that we're after. We project onto it a field of great love. Would you say so? I'm going to suggest that this darkness is equal to that, a field of great love. That the two, in a sense, are not separate. And just one other point based on what you already said is that, we're talking about going beyond duality on one level. There was an experience when I trained at Green Gulch Farm, the first Zen center where I lived. And Green Gulch Farm is connected to Tassajara, where you said you spent some time a long time ago. I remember one of the first teachings was around softening one's gaze and noticing the difference between this habit we have of using our eyes in a very active, single-pointed way, and how that connects with the mind of discrimination and labeling that I'm pointing to, versus learning to soften the gaze as part of a meditative way of life and perceive from a wholeness rather than this constant discrimination. So that does point directly to softening the gaze being an ally in releasing duality. So I feel that we're talking about similar things coming from really different experiences, yeah? But one other point I think is just important for listeners to consider, and I'll just share as a little background. I'm not suggesting that enlightenment is the wrong path. My pursuit of enlightenment saved my life and transformed my life. I am inviting people to consider that in this day and age, it would also benefit us to open to the potential for endarkenment, to be open to noticing some old cobwebby belief systems that can come even into play in our spiritual practice that might not be so useful. But one way this might be relevant to people listening or accessible is just to consider one's relationship with shadow, right? That many different spiritual paths today, when people are, again, trying to get away from the dark, there can be an assumption that the shadows I see within myself or the shadows I see in others are bad or wrong. And so I should definitely try to get rid of them. I should definitely try to fix them and be done with them. And again, for people listening, I'll just define shadow as those aspects of ourself, our experience, emotions that are not aligned with how we see ourselves or want to be seen, right? And so in my experience, there was a beautiful shift when I woke up from the assumption that the goal was to get away from shadow in order to transcend, to the recognition that, number one, my shadows were sacred messengers, and that each and every one of them was standing in front of a doorway to a greater inner power I had not yet tapped into. And that also allowed me to completely open my heart to other people, to humanity in a bigger way, when I was not connecting shadow with bad. And the second piece about it is that the very process of being willing to turn towards and greet and befriend shadow, like we can turn towards and befriend the night, that process puts us in much deeper touch with who and what we really are, with our innate compassion, with our innate resilience. Yeah, those two words are strong here: compassion and resilience.
I just want to remind our viewers and listeners we're speaking with Deborah Eden Tull, author of one of her 3 books, Luminous Darkness, her latest one. And this is just a wide open discussion. I'm enjoying every bit of it. Like I said, I am open to learning. I'm going to have a lot to contemplate after this, but she goes by the name Eden, by the way, which is very cool. I love that name. I do want to ask you a couple other questions because
please go for it.
I'm really interested. So you commit at the age of 26 to becoming a Zen Buddhist monk in a silent retreat for 7.5 years, but yet you chose to come back in everyday life and you got married. And why did you make this choice to come back in everyday society?
Sure, it was very unexpected. There was a part of me who I think thought I will be a monastic for the rest of my life because I was so committed to practice and the lifestyle. I got bit by a tick while I was a monk and didn't know it. So one day at the age of 30, I woke up feeling like I was in the body of a 90-year-old woman, not knowing what had happened to me, not knowing what was going on. And this began a many-year journey of navigating the ups and downs, because sometimes I would feel back to normal and sometimes, whoop, of having Lyme without knowing it. So any listeners who have either navigated chronic illness, which is a great example if you make it your spiritual practice of how darkness can be a great teacher. I awakened more through my experience of Lyme than any other experience I had had. And I talk about that in the book. It shed more of my ego and limiting beliefs than anything had. But back to your original question here, it was a few years later that in conversation with my teacher, we just recognized it would be really wise for me to get some more medical attention for whatever was going on. And so I went to Los Angeles just for a few months to stay with family, to work with a doctor we thought might help. And towards the end of that time, I had a very unexpected dream. And in this dream, I basically felt and received a calling. It was the first time I had considered, oh my gosh, the training I've received. I'm so lucky, and I'm out here in this world where there's so much suffering. And I just felt a complete, clear calling to live out in the world and serve. So that's how that unfolded very unexpectedly for me.
Wow. And here you are doing some beautiful work. This is amazing. Of course, again, like I said, I would like to find out a couple other things. Let's talk about the overlighting of Earth. What is why is that a negative thing? What is going on with that?
Yeah. Well, all of biological life on this planet is dependent on both light and dark. So in the past 50 years, we're experiencing actually the overlighting of our planet, which means over 60% of planet Earth is now artificially lit at night. The US and Europe, over 90%. That's a lot. And so we're finding through studies, there are some great articles written about this. The LA Times just had a great article come out about this, that there really hadn't been the foresight about what that would mean for both different species of plants and animals who are deeply struggling with that, to also the impact on the human body, on our circadian rhythms, on the endocrine system. There's some interesting statistics in the book, and there are fabulous studies about this, but it's very profound. We need darkness. And I think about it really when you consider, I mean, maybe people listening can just consider for a moment, when you look at the dominant paradigm, how much there's not a lot of support for restoration. There's so much productivity, doing, speed, and really not much valuing as is needed for restoration. I see this as a real metaphor for the overlighting of our planet. And even within my lifetime and yours, just to recognize how screen dependent we've now become and how much time we spend on devices that are artificially lit. So I would recommend that people learn about this and also learn about ways to take good care of yourself. I have really conscious boundaries with my devices, with artificial lights. My husband and I use candlelight or oil lamps at night. It creates a quality of well-being and health that we don't take for granted. Yeah?
Oh, absolutely. It is amazing what modern society is doing with the screens. What is it, blue light from the phones, or, one thing that I do at night with my cell phone. I used to just leave it next to my bed charging all night. And now I just turn it completely off.
Yeah.
I don't need that there anymore. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Too much light. I'll never forget, growing up in a metropolitan area near Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up, when I finally went out to the Southwest and I'm driving through the night in New Mexico and Arizona, and I actually saw the stars and the gases of the Milky Way, I go, what is that? You know?
Yes, yes. And one of the simple questions I'll ask people at the beginning of a darkness retreat, a luminous darkness retreat, is just to reflect on and to appreciate the experiences we've had in our lives of resting under the night sky that have really been healing for us, that have been moving for us. For me as a kid, so much was informed by time I spent under the vast night sky. And then I would come back to an artificially lit, dimly lit sky city. But the night sky was always poignant for me. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great way to put it. I like that. So you also, again, throwing my 97 million questions at you. What exactly is Dharma? I know you teach Dharma.
Sure. Dharma is, I'm talking about Buddha Dharma. So there's many ways that it can be defined through different paths, but practice waking people up to who we really are, waking people up from the small self and the mind of separation and limitation and discrimination to this place I point to in the book from which we can see with the heart. And while I come from, my teachings really do come from the heart of Zen, I've also, over the years, and I've been out of the monastery for what, 14 years now, I've incorporated the gifts from many wisdom streams. I've been touched and informed by many spiritual teachings. So still anchored in the heart of Zen, but really have expanded the field from which I teach. And for me, I believe that there are so many pathways pointing to, in very complementary ways, how we can wake up from the myth of separation. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned seeing from the heart. Don't you offer a program called that? What exactly?
I do. Yeah, I offer a 6-month training and mentorship that's quite amazing called The Heart of Listening. And the next step people can participate in after that is a year-long training called Seeing with the Heart. And so this is for people who want to go much deeper in their spiritual practice. Oftentimes people who are facilitators or teachers themselves or community leaders join. But there's so much powerful, potent work we can do when we come together in a concentrated way. And so this is all offered online. I used to offer it in person, but it's extraordinary to now get together with global community and do these trainings online.
I know there's a beautiful organization called the Heart Math, and I know teacher Greg Braden is a big teacher of the power that the heart is actually the source of our main power. So again, that's another whole show right there.
But they have great resources out. Yeah.
Yeah. Eden, I would like to ask you one last question, knowing
Sure.
what a beautiful proponent you are of a healthy ecology. What is your take on the current state of the ecological state of Mother Earth and humanity? Is there hope for our survival?
Thank you. Thank you. I am someone who's been involved in healing work around the ecological, which is also ecological and social crisis, from a young age. And I really feel that it's one of the most important things people can do to be willing to enter spaces for consciously grieving the loss of living systems that has already occurred. Let's set aside what might happen in the future, but that already up until this point, the loss of species, the impacts of climate crisis, that grief, and this is another chapter I write about in the book, grief and compassion are two sides of the same coin. If we numb out our willingness to feel our grief as part of the natural feedback system of planet Earth, we numb out our capacity for both compassion and joy. That grieving consciously and together is so important. Same thing if we were talking about the healing of systemic racism, okay? I do a lot of work with people who are engaged in solutions and also ways to navigate the climate crisis more skillfully. We're going to need to gather so much resilience, so much creative resourcefulness for how to live in a changing world. I've written a lot about this, so people are welcome to reach out if you want more resources on this, but I don't necessarily feel that it's useful to go up into our minds and try to project, are we going to survive through this or not? Nature will show us, but that if instead that energy could go to, how can I allow the crises of our times to inform me, to show up as fully, courageously, and free of conditioning as I can, as part of our collective healing. I'm going next week to Washington, D.C. to guide a group of leaders there in some grief work around climate change, as there's more recognition that the importance of being willing to feel our feelings, to go down into our bodies and get out of our heads and feel our feelings about this thing that's unfolding, that's bigger than anything our ancestors face. Puts us in touch with a deeper source of shared power, and we're going to need to access that going forth. So the final chapter of my book, I'll say, is about releasing fear and embracing emergence. And emergence is a really great teacher when we're talking about something like the climate crisis, the emergence that is occurring right now, and that even before humans were here, the different states the earth was in. I'll also name that there's a field of work I teach called The Work That Reconnects, which was created by Buddhist scholar and eco-philosopher Joanna Macy, who's now about 93 and is about as full of energy as any human being I've ever met. And it's a really beautiful field for transforming our pain and love for our world into compassionate action. So again, it's not so much about, can we project what the outcome's going to be, but on a sense, if I'm giving my entire self in service to love, informed by these times to do so, then that's the hope isn't even about what the end result's going to be. The hope is about how I'm showing up today and every day. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I love everything you said. And you know, what's interesting, because this morning I drove to a local bike path where I live to go do my morning run. And on the way back, I got stopped at a railroad crossing and the train that came by was nothing but about 100 cars of coal. And all I could think of the entire time was all 100 cars of the coal is going to end up in the atmosphere.
It's wild. It's mind-blowing.
That's one train. You know, I mean, there's thousands of those, and you know, it's all part of the energy system. And then we have beautiful young people like Greta Thunberg from Scandinavia, quite the ecological activist. But you know, we can go on forever. We're going to wind up here talking again to Deborah Eden Tull. It really comes through. Your gentle soul is really radiating from you in luminous darkness. So I love it. And people, I advise you check out her book. It will definitely make you think about a lot of things are new. What's the complete title of that book?
Luminous Darkness, an Engaged Buddhist Approach to Embracing the Unknown. And I'll also share that it's full of practices and inquiry. So there's room for you to reflect and explore. And it's really about guiding people through a transformation down into the body, into an even closer connection with the earth, again, away from the realm of concept and ideas, into seeing what endarkenment can offer alongside and with enlightenment. Yeah.
And there's a term that I believe people have never heard before, endarkenment, and they can contemplate that when they read your book. What's your website?
My website is my full name, DeborahEdenTull.com. And people can find me on social media or look up Mindful Living Revolution on social media, and feel free to reach out. Yeah.
And of course, I will put your website listing along with the posting of this podcast. So, thank you so much. It's been very, very interesting. Thank you putting up with all my questions. So I really
they're fabulous. Thank you so much.
This has been another episode of World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with host Carl Gruber, a certified law of attraction life coach. We welcome you to tune in to each and every episode of World Awakenings as we open your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to the truth of all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how much they play an all-important role in our moment-to-moment daily life. Much love and light to you, my friend, and thank you for tuning into World Awakenings.